Welcome back to our last session of day one of the Australian Circular Economy Forum 2022. We have a must-see panel discussion with Victoria, South Australia, the ACT and New South Wales, hosted by our very own Jodie Bricu. For those of you just joining now, Jodie is one of Australia's leading circular economy experts. She's a circular economy advisor to many state-funded bodies, and we're proud to have her on our board at New South Wales Circular. So Jodie, over to you, and I'm really looking forward to this discussion.
Hi Lisa, thanks. I hope everyone had a great lunch break for those of you who are returning from the last session. If not, welcome to this really exciting Australia's Circular Economy Forum hosted by New South Wales Circular. I'm coming to you from Kaurna country, Adelaide in South Australia. Today, now we have this great panel with our state governments from across the country. We're missing a few, but we've got quite a good diversity here. Two of our biggest states, or two biggest states, with Emily Yip from New South Wales and Angela Hoefnagels from Victoria. And then two slightly smaller but highly innovative states, Ian Overton from South Australia, Green Industries SA. So, you know, we're the home team here today, which is fun. And Michael Trushell from the ACT. I'll give you a bit of a longer introduction to everyone as we go through. We're going to start off with asking each of our panelists a question. We're basically letting everyone present where their organisation is at, where their state organisation is at with transitioning their state to becoming more circular. We're going to start with Emily Yip, who some of you might have seen in the last presentation, giving a really good rundown on the 30-year waste management plan and everything they're doing at DPI to accelerate circular economy there. So Emily is the Director of Circular Economy Policy and Markets within the New South Wales Government Department of Planning, Industry and Environment. And Emily, over to you with what you guys are doing at DPI to accelerate New South Wales' transition to a circular economy.
Thanks, Jodie. I just want to make a correction that we are Department of Planning and Environment. The industry is gone. So we are not called DPI anymore. We are DPE. A bit of a...
I did that on purpose so that everyone around the country can update their databases. DPE which now, not DPI. Don't make that mistake.
And we're probably going to have other changes along the way soon too. So who knows?
Thanks, Emily.
So for those in the audience who were in the presentation session earlier today, I actually spoke about how New South Wales government is committed to make a transition to a circular economy over the next 20 years, and also cover a range of initiatives that we are taking to support the commitment. One of the key things was the release of our Waste and Sustainable Materials Strategy 2041 last year, where we are working to reduce waste and also changing how we use our resources to make them as productive as possible. So the strategy is backed by $356 million in funding over 5 years, and we'll be looking at delivering key policy reforms and also priority programs to help us meet our waste and circular economy infrastructure needs. We'll also be looking at initiatives that can help us to reduce carbon emissions, and also trying to continue to make sure that we have a system in place to protect our environment and the human health from waste pollution. I'm not going to cover all these things in detail again. I'm just going to give a very quick walkthrough. I also just want to add in that waste and recycling are just part of the story for how we are transitioning to a circular economy. We recognize that we need to do more across the whole of supply chain so that we can close the loop. And we also need to look at opportunities throughout the life cycle of products and material. And this is why we are embedding circular economy principles and opportunities across various government strategies, plans, and programs. I mentioned in my earlier presentation how circular economy is being featured in many of our strategies across our transport, water, investment portfolio. And I suppose the other key message that I sort of want to add on here is that transitioning New South Wales to a circular economy is actually a key for us to meet our net zero emissions goal by 2050. So it's actually a key pillar for our net zero plan. A circular economy approach will increase our carbon efficiency, not just by designing out waste, but also making sure that we use less energy intensive material for production, increasing the lifespan of our products, and also reusing and recycling materials and resources to avoid emissions associated with raw material extractions and production.
Fantastic.
This actually creates a role for New South Wales government to support, this sort of whole of supply chain activity to lower emissions and contribute to our ambitions. And I suppose in my presentation earlier as well, I mentioned how we are trying to embed net zero within our net zero program, the circular economy opportunities as well, through our low emissions building material program, for example, which created the wonderful sort of industry alliance with over 100 organizations for the Material Embodied Carbon Leaders Alliance, which is called MECLA. So these are some of the areas where we are hoping to work with the industry, work with the businesses to create that sort of momentum for whole of supply chain sort of transition to circular economy. I suppose the other part that I want to touch on is that, as we heard from all the other previous speakers in earlier session, we actually need a system level transformation and also mindset change from everyone, from all levels of government, businesses, manufacturers, industries from all sectors, and also through to consumers, so that we can drive the transition to a circular economy. And many of the solutions will only be effective if they are harmonized nationally, and that we will continue to work with our federal colleagues and our colleagues from other states and territory jurisdictions, so that we can actually implement national solutions and make sure that we have consistency to actually enable effective sort of market change. Lastly, I think we are all on the same page that there are a lot needs to be done for us to get closer to a real circular economy. And we are looking forward to being part of the solution and journey with the audience from this forum. Thank you.
Thanks, Emily. We'll be able to explore lots of those points further. I'd just like to shout out to the audience at this point as well. Please pop your questions in the Q&A box. We will be able to address them as we go through as well, if you've got questions to any of our presenters today. Emily, I'm just curious as well, before we jump on to Angela. So you've released a waste and sustainable materials strategy. When in the timeline did that stop being just a waste strategy and become a waste and sustainable materials strategy? I imagine that was an important sort of turning in the development of the strategy.
Well, it's a combination of, I suppose, let me take a step back. The strategy is actually a new iteration of our waste strategy. So before that, we already have a waste less, recycle more strategy, and the focus is very much on waste. And you'll notice that we actually added in the sustainable material component into this strategy. And the key principle of that is to embed the circular economy sort of principles throughout the strategy. And that's where we actually sort of start introducing some of the new thinking around how we incorporate circular design principles in our building infrastructure and precincts development, for example. We also look at how we actually incentivize circular economy approach through, for example, our carbon abatement and recycling fund. And that is to actually support projects to look at how we can use low carbon material, for example, and how we can also encourage recovery of biogas from waste. Again, is the emissions or reduction in mind, and also what other ways that we can actually enable sort of better material use in the construction industry too, for example, material passports, and then also looking at how, where are the opportunities for better sort of circular economy opportunities within precinct. So I think, while it is not a full shift to a circular economy sort of overarching policy strategy, recognizing that we still need to deliver a waste strategy, it actually does feature a lot of the new thinking and making sure that we are in the first step of that transition.
Great. And Angela, in Victoria, there's been a similar kind of marrying of the circular strategy and the waste strategy. Angela is Director of Programs and High Risk Waste at the Victorian Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning, and I hope I got that one right. So Angela, talk to us about how Recycling Victoria has changed how you guys address circular economy.
Yeah, thanks, Jodie. So yeah, we're 2 years into delivering Recycling Victoria now, which is our circular economy policy. And despite the name, it is actually a circular economy policy and is framed around circular economy principles. It responded to some really significant challenges that we were facing around the time that the policy was developed in our recycling sector. And so it has a very strong focus also on delivering a recycling system that Victorians can rely on. But it doesn't end there, because it recognises that the long-term response to those recycling industry challenges that we were facing, which were global, is the shift towards a more circular economy. So it incorporates 4 key streams of work that include designing products across our economy to last and to be repaired and to be recycled, using products to create more value, recycling more resources, and as I said, that's a real focus for us in the early stages of this 10-year policy, and also reducing harm from waste. It's got some really ambitious targets in it, which align with the national waste targets. So that includes diverting 80% of waste from landfill, cutting total waste generation by 15%, halving organic waste going to landfill. But it starts to create some structural shifts around that too. So some key elements of it include some really major reforms to the way that we collect waste and recyclable materials from households, with a forecast to that being spread across the state. So we're moving towards a 4-bin or a 4 waste stream system of source separation, and that source separation is going to be really critical to ensuring that we have recovered materials to be used in the Victorian economy to create new goods in the future. It also includes some major legislative overhaul too. So we're on 1 July, we'll see the establishment of Recycling Victoria, the new regulator for the waste and recycling sector, and also some really substantial investment, not just in the recycling sector, but across the economy. So lots of investment into say end markets for recycled content, and also our Circular Economy Business Innovation Centre is really focused on supporting businesses across the economy to innovate and to change the way that they do business, as well as to find really great new uses of recovered materials so that we can keep them circulating through the economy. I'm sure we'll get a chance to talk about more of those in detail, but that's the snapshot, Jodie.
Thanks so much. Now over to Ian. So Dr. Ian Overton's the Chief Executive of Green Industries SA here in South Australia, and has come to that role in the past couple of years from a lot of really diverse experience in business, academia and government, including 17 years with CSIRO. So Ian, South Australia's got the reputation of being quite inventive and out there with circular economy, which is great. We want to sometimes considered one of the leaders in the process. How's Green Industries going transitioning our smaller state to a circular economy?
Yeah, thanks, Jodie. And sorry, excuse my throat. still in COVID, but hopefully I'll get through it. Yeah, thanks for the introduction. And South Australia has been sort of a bit of a leader. We've had container deposit for 44 years. We've had a very strong waste levy, which has driven our landfill diversion to 83%. We've had many years of investment in recycling infrastructure and organics processing. So we have a really good FOGO system in South Australia. And we've got, our history of single-use plastic bans and single-use plastic items like straws, etc. And I've got a pay credit to Vaughan Levitsky and Zero Waste SA for their legacy from, a dedicated agency back in 2003, which really drove where we are today. But like other states, we're moving on from waste into circular economy and now into climate. Really, climate action is critical. It's required at pace and at scale. I think if everybody lived like we did, we would need 4 or 5 planets. So it's just something that's really become now part of the circular economy story as we talk about it. And South Australia, again, is in a good place because of our decarbonisation of our energy system. So we have renewable energies in wind and solar, which can drive things like low emissions, concrete and steel, etc., and things like that. So it's really about how we can take businesses through that journey from waste to circular economy, but to play that role within climate change. As Ellen MacArthur says, that 45% of global emissions are from the products and services that we use, and 40% of that can be tackled with circular economy. So it has a big carbon component. But with the focus on climate, a lot of it has been on carbon, decarbonising, and yet climate change is a lot more than just carbon. It is about those materials that we use. We're breaking our limits in terms of phosphorus and nitrogen and all those kind of areas as well, as other chemical cycles and biodiversity, etc. So we're looking at how circular economy can help us become more resilient in the climate space going into the future. So we're as an agency, we're doing, I think, all the things that people have been talking about today. It's been a great day to listen to those activities: procurement, circular business models, investing in new business ideas and social enterprises, maker spaces, giving out grants, all those kind of things. But let me just touch on what I think are probably the real key actions for a state government here, and what if you think about what our role is. Number one, I think it's around setting limits, regulation standards, bans, carbon limit per square metre on new buildings, whatever we can do. We've got that role to actually bring in legislation and put these limits on businesses to actually who want to adopt, but they don't have a level playing field. So if you might have a builder who wants to build a green building, but they're going to go for the cheapest construction, whereas a green construction might cost a bit more. If we can level that playing field, then I think that's a really good role that we move forward. The other thing is in catalysing the change. We do know that it needs to be at scale and at pace, and I think governments need to invest in that catalysation. A lot around awareness, like metrics, to make people understand and measure and benchmark and then monitor our progress. It's a little hard to manage a system if you're not monitoring it. I think we really need a step change in transportation and construction and demolition, and also some of the areas around understanding infrastructure city planning for supply chains, so that we can actually get industry moving forward. And the last one is about consumer, and all these things are very hard, of course, but curbside reform, even changing bins frequency systems raises a lot. One council in South Australia said that they were going to do a trial of weekly organics, and that just raises hundreds and hundreds of people commenting about what happens with my nappies and things like that. So these are real issues. We as a community here are in people's front yards with their bins, but then we range right up to climate change from a global perspective. So it's a very diverse range of activities, but a real amazing role, I think, for state government. Thanks.
Thanks, Ian. That's fantastic. Last but not least, Michael Trushell, who is the Executive Business Manager with ACT No Waste, which is within Transport Canberra and City Services. And Michael's had amazing experience as well in waste policy for the National Waste Policy Action Plan as well at the Office of the Australian Department of Agriculture, Water and the Environment. So he's got great background in this at a national level as well. Michael, how are you guys going? How are you approaching this in the ACT? A quite different state to the others, much more city-based really than the other states. Where are you guys at with that?
Yeah, thanks, Jodie. That's right. And in fact, we are right this year developing the ACT's first circular economy strategy, and we've drawn very much on the experiences of cities overseas to inform the approach that we've taken. So essentially, it'll be an early steps document. It's interesting listening to some of the commentary of others around how far we've got to go and how fundamental this change is. So we kind of recognise this. We see it very much as an early steps document. We're trying to clearly differentiate it from waste management, which is quite challenging. But at the same time, clearly acknowledging the really critical role of recycling in the ACT at the moment as part of that. We're looking at sort of a thematic basis where I guess it's a fairly modest first step, where we're looking at sort of 4 themes, which include organics, consumer goods, built environment, and also future and emerging waste streams. We'll aim to align it very much within sort of under the ACT's climate change strategy, which has been it's an older strategy, which has really been all pervasive in the ACT. That's somewhere where we've made really significant progress. And at the same time, we also want to differentiate it from the ACT waste management strategy as well. So one of our sort of key sort of policy issues at the moment is how do we differentiate it, and how do we avoid sort of overlap, but clear policy integration with other policies and strategies. The idea is to keep it fairly short, so sort of 3 to 4 years to sort of focus on, you know, some short-term achievable steps to sort of show success and then develop learning and collaboration. We want to focus very much on identifying pathways to achieve breadth and scale within the ACT economy. So while case studies are great, they're a means to an end, they're not an end to themselves, but that's not always, I guess, well appreciated. Obviously focus on things like identifying and removing barriers, which is a real clear issue for us. And after that, we develop the strategy. We'll then develop an action plan and legislation sort of through 22, 23 to commence in the second half of 23. So the action plan is where we'll seek commitments from stakeholders right across the ACT and the region to take really tangible action in the short term. So just get as many people involved in different parts of society as we can. And obviously the governance to drive this will be really critical. And then the legislation will essentially be an enabler to provide sort of regulatory frameworks and models that help enable the other aspects of what we're trying to achieve here, and noting that we're already making significant progress around rolling out single-use plastics at the moment in the ACT. So that's sort of a bit of a potted summary of where we're at.
Potted is fantastic. Thank you, Michael. Before we jump in, we've had some really good questions already on the Q&A, so keep those coming. I've got a really, really, really basic question. I have a reputation for asking these. I would like everyone to tell us very simply why they're going to circular. What's in it for them? Why is their state moving towards circular economy rather than staying with a traditional waste management approach? Maybe start with Ian.
Sure. Well, look, there's a number of reasons. One is that straight waste management doesn't provide those environmental benefits that we're trying to achieve. It doesn't reduce raw material use. And even though it might divert from landfill, it just creates a recycling issue that takes a lot of energy to recycle back. And there's a lot of opportunities for recycling, like putting glass into roads, but it's really kind of a linear, sort of extended linear rather than a true sort of recycling. So definitely circular economy allows us to maximise the value of our resources, goes a long way to creating sovereign risk. But also really, I guess, is the economic opportunity, the business models that creates, the place that we can put our businesses on the global stage, the contribution that circular economy makes to ESG credentials and allows our businesses in South Australia to continue to play in international markets.
Angela, how about in Victoria?
Yeah, similar, Jodie. So there's a few different reasons why it's really important. One is that we've got some really ambitious climate change targets. So we've got to hit 28 to 33% by 2025 and 45 to 50% by 2030, below 2005 levels. And you know, changing the way that we produce and use goods in the economy is a really important part of getting to net zero by 2050. We can't do that solely by changing the way we do energy. Similarly, it's about the economy too, right? So it's about finding materials productivity. You know, we've done lots of kind of rounds of productivity improvements to our economy over time, and I think the next big one is about materials productivity. So for me, circular economy is really about how do we get the maximum value and the maximum benefit for people out of every unit of material that we extract from the natural environment and inject into the economy. So there's lots of opportunity for businesses and the planet to both benefit from the transition to a circular economy.
That's a great framework to look at it from, Angela. There's lots of interesting parts to unpick in that analysis. Michael, how about you in the ACT? What's driven you to?
Well, our story is a little bit different. So we've got a sort of a coalition government of ACT Greens and ACT Labor, and at the beginning of the election term, they created a document called the Parliamentary and Governing Agreement, which sets out the basis in which they'll jointly govern and also priorities. So in 2020, when we received this document, there was an interesting initiative in there called circular economy legislation, and that was the start for us. And so our policy team has had a really interesting job of sort of working out what that meant and what the intent was. So we're coming probably from a sort of a background of, well, we've then evolved that through our work into getting agreement to develop a strategy first, and then an action plan and legislation. So same reason, like there's all the potential there, but I'm not quite sure that we've got necessarily the buy-in yet. So one of our challenges is kind of explaining the opportunities within, you know, obviously we've got a fantastic climate strategy which we can sort of work within. So there's plenty of opportunity, but we've got to clearly be able to explain, well, how's this different but nevertheless complementary, and where the opportunities lie. So that's our big challenges. I think one of communication with stakeholders and convincing people that the effort is worth it.
Great. Emily, I think you went through your drivers really well in your initial presentation. Are there any specifics that you want to draw out for New South Wales on why circular economy is so important for you?
Yeah, I suppose, you know, both Ian and Angela sort of touch on the economic and also from a emissions reductions and, you know, climate change perspective, why we need to be there. I think the reality is that we can't go on the way that we are going on. We won't have enough space to take care of, you know, all the stuff that we use and consume. So that's still the bottom line, is we need to find a better way. But again, you know, all the additional benefits about meeting our emissions targets and also creating the economic benefit, creating new jobs by, you know, attracting circular economy innovations and investment in Australia. I think that's a biggie from an economic development perspective. And also, I suppose part of the more sort of recent emerging driver in our face is, you know, the supply chain shock that we have because of COVID, and, you know, making sure that we actually increase the resilience of our local markets for material that we can actually recycle here and also use it back in our manufacturing is another way to actually help our industry to prevent that type of external shock and stresses from the resource commodity markets. And also, I suppose at the end of the day, you know, from an economic perspective, it's also making sure that we strengthen the economy and strengthen the competitive advantage for our local industry, as well as we are competing with all the international markets for, markets that actually demand for better low carbon sort of material. So, you know, that is already there internationally. And, you know, if we don't actually get on to that journey, we are going to be left behind.
Some great points. It was great to bring up the supply chain resilience. I think we've all got a completely different notion of supply chain resilience now post-COVID. I remember doing training pre-COVID about the importance to shift supply chains, and everyone would go, no, it's not that important, and we can't do that. Everything's too fixed. And the way businesses and supply chains have actually shifted radically so quickly, I think is actually quite inspiring that we've had to do it over the past 2 years. But actually, how can we leverage that to do things better by choice rather than just being backed into a corner? I've got loads of questions for you, but I get to talk to you guys quite frequently, which is a beautiful part of my job. So I'll try to let the other people ask questions now. But Susan McHatty's got a great question around whether and how you incorporate water as a target and a lever in your strategy and implementation. Does anyone want to have a crack at that one? Ian, you have to talk about this.
Yeah, I guess I do, don't I? Especially with the introduction. So water is one of our resources that we need to make circular. So wastewater reuse, water recycling, aquifer storage recharge, etc., that we can then utilise water over and over again. And I think already there's an alarming statistic that says by the time the River Murray has got down to Adelaide, it's already been through 4 people. Which I'll raise a glass and have a drink to that. But yeah, water is one of those resources that we need to keep recycling, just like energy, and it's a component of the circular economy. So when we look at producing products, so with new business models, products as a service, we can think about how do we utilize water and energy to create those products. And so it's not just a materials efficiency. I always think of it as an energy, water and materials efficiency that we need to incorporate within the circular economy.
Anyone else like to jump in on that one?
I just add into that. I mentioned that, you know, part of this is to actually think about how we incorporate circular economy thinking in all the various strategies that we have from a government perspective. And one of the sort of recent addition to our New South Wales waste strategy for New South Wales water strategy, for example, is that within that strategy actually recognize the importance of circular economy, and also committed to actually partnering with councils and water utilities, industries and communities to actually look at how we can pilot innovative urban water management to improve resource efficiency or water efficiency and recovery. So I think that's the sort of work that we need to continue to get on with, is to actually look at where other opportunities to actually enhance the adoption of circular economy beyond just materials and products. Like water is a fantastic area that we should actually look at as well. And I'm sure there are so many other resources that we need to look at.
Dijan Simovic just added the comment that adds space and time to energy, water and materials. Time we can't recycle. We need to be very efficient with that, which is an interesting thing to think about. Angela and Michael, are either of you looking at the water side of things as well?
Look, our colleagues in across DELP in the water sector are very deeply interested in how the circular economy relates to their work. And one of the reasons why it wasn't included in our circular economy policy initially, along with the energy sector, was that both our energy and water sectors already had very substantial initiatives considering the sustainability of their sectors, and that work continues alongside delivery of the circular economy policy. I think it's a really good question, though, in the same way that lots of businesses, or all the businesses across the economy, are thinking about how to integrate circular economy into their processes and practices and their relationships in their supply chains. Equally, government is going through a bit of a transformation and thinking about how across the different parts of government we make that work collectively. And so that's an ongoing endeavour.
Yeah, and in Europe we're seeing many more circular economy policies that are kind of cohabitating between multiple parts of government. So it's not just sitting in the sort of resource wasty kind of arm of government, but it might be in energy, water, often agriculture as well, or industry as well. So thinking about how we can carry this together across different units of government, that it does create a kind of umbrella. Michael, did you want to comment on that one as well?
Look, I think probably the climate change strategy and adaptation has probably been the key driver, more so than circular economy. So Canberra's a dry climate. It's been getting progressively drier over recent decades. So there's been a lot of focus around that. But I think it certainly makes sense, the sort of discussions we heard this morning about some of the sort of the building design, the infrastructure work being to recycle water on site. There's probably been not as much focus on that in the ACT as opposed to reducing water consumption, things like increasing dam capacities and things like that. But I think inevitably it will. But I don't think we've probably explicitly made that link with circular economy at this stage. But I think all these things really are related to each other. It's all about sustainability of all resources, and water's obviously a really critical one.
Angela, you had a very specific question aimed to you, which is a toughie. Sorry to do this to you, Angela, but it's around what's in a name, and as you move forward, can the recycling be dropped from the title of your policy that we all hoped was going to be a circular economy policy for Victoria, and we went, oh no, when it wasn't, but we understand why it was as well.
Yeah, it's a little bit challenging to change the name halfway through delivery because we've got branding all over everything. But actually we are increasingly referring to it as our circular economy policy rather than Recycling Victoria, partly because we're about to stand up an organisation called Recycling Victoria, so that's about to get pretty confusing. So yes, we will have Recycling Victoria, the new regulator looking after the waste and recycling sector, and our circular economy policy, formerly known as Recycling Victoria.
And you also have the very high profile Circular Economy Business Innovation Centre that gives you a good vector for talking about all things circular.
Indeed, indeed. And certainly that's that's been been getting some really great profile in Victoria, and there's some fantastic events that have been happening during Fashion Week and Design Week to really tackle those sectors and bring big swathes of the economy into the conversation with government and with academia and business to really problem solve collectively about how we can innovate towards a circular economy.
Great. And we had a question for you as well. Vanessa Watson has a property development client who's priced out a new build with best-in-class sustainability circular principles because it was triple their typical cost. So do you have any further information on what levelling the playing field might look like in South Australia and across the country to make that a reality?
Yeah, it's a real problem, isn't it? And I would love to see that being a real playing field in that sense, but it's very challenging. Anything to do with planning is hugely challenging. You know, we've had wonderful successes in South Australia, but simply getting waste pickups to be incorporated into planning design in like multi-unit dwellings is just something that you just go, why is this so difficult? But we are moving towards that. I think to get that build that you just described on a level playing field requires a lot of legislation, a lot of requirements. But Debbie O'Byrne, who's probably, I saw her earlier on in this session, she's probably out there in the audience, mentioned to me the other day about an idea of having a carbon limit per square metre on a new build. I think that's a fabulous idea if we set those kind of limits where you say, okay, you can have your build, but the embedded carbon has to be at a certain amount. And so how you do that in terms of using recycled materials, using green steel, or building the building so that it can be deconstructed at the end, which then doesn't sort of lose a lot of those materials. How the building industry does that would be up to them. You'd create space for innovation. But that's where I think where the role of government comes in, is to say, yes, but this is what we want to achieve. These are the kind of outcomes. You innovate, you do what you do best, and you compete in a market space, but we are directing where we want to go in terms of those limits.
Would anyone else like to comment on this one? I just want to flag something that's been said in the chat box as well around the importance. Michael McElliott has talked about the importance of economy of scales and supportive infrastructure as well. So there perhaps other ways that your states could help facilitate that levelling of the playing field. Angela, Emily, or Michael, have you got any particular initiatives in that space that are worth stopping on?
No, sorry, I don't really have anything to add to that. I'm a bit like Ian. I mean, we deal with all the developers in terms of the planning stages, trying to get compliance with various design standards to be able to deliver a waste service, and that's hard enough because the developers are so under the pump in terms of pricing. The ACT's got a real challenge around affordable housing and having enough housing, and that tends to take priority. So the only thing that this is where I struggle a little bit with circular economy being treated as a sort of a separate concept. I think you've got to consider sustainability in all its aspects, including the well-being of people. So the cost of living and things like that, you can't be ignoring that, because the risk is that in all this shift towards greater environmental sustainability, you leave a whole bunch of people behind. And at times you see evidence of that, and that does concern me a bit, that yes, you'll have those who can afford it can make the transition. What happens to everyone else? So I mean, one of our big challenges is, like a lot of cities, the people with lesser economic means live on the fringes. So they've got transport issues and things like that. So a lot of the benefits of, I guess, urban redeveloped consolidation that we're seeing in Canberra, in the sort of central areas, it's very expensive to live, but you can save a lot of money on transport, and you've got access to a whole bunch of services. But for those who can't afford to do that, they get left behind. So that's the thing that I guess I tend to look at a little bit when we're considering circular economy. You've got to consider it in its broader concept of social as well as environmental sustainability.
Great. Angela, Emily, or shall I jump on to go?
Sure. No. I was just going to say our significant kind of intervention into the built environment through the current policy is through our Recycled First policy, which goes to government procurement, particularly focused initially on Victoria's big build. So for those from other states, Victoria is investing about $80 billion into our major transport infrastructure over the next decade or so. And there's a really significant investment in increasing the amount of recycled content going into those builds and thinking about how we can be more sustainable about the way that we build that infrastructure, and seeing some really great innovations like the introduction of recycled plastic noise walls along freeways that can then be recycled again at the end of their useful life. But I think the thing that we've learned through that is, or that we're learning through that, is just how complicated that kind of endeavour is. There's been just an enormous amount of work done mapping supply chains and requirements for those really big projects. And also a lot of work that has a lot of really detailed work that's had to go into revising specifications for those really high risk, very high importance kind of infrastructure projects that have really low tolerance for risk management. So there's been it's a really big challenge in the transition to a circular economy and to integrate more recycled content into new products, to think about the risk of using recycled over virgin as well, and where it's great and better, and where you have to be really careful. So a lot of really deep thinking going on with our colleagues in Major Transport Infrastructure Authority around that.
Jodie, can I jump in?
Emily's turning.
Just going.
No, Ian,
it's not my turn.
Yeah.
No, quickly jump in, then we'll go back to Emily.
Oh, okay. I was going to, following on, just we're talking about difficult challenges, and I was going to pose to my fellow panelists another difficult challenge, which is around consumption, and more you hear the word degrowth. As a state government, that's really challenging to talk about degrowth or reducing consumption of things. So I just wondered about how the states are tackling that as part of the circular economy.
Emily, did you want to comment on the construction stuff first before tackling the massive question of degrowth?
I'm not sure if I have the answer for degrowth.
Yeah.
I have to think about that. Yeah, just about the construction piece. And I think I mentioned before, part of our strategy is to actually look at promoting circular design principles through our new development. Also looking at, planning policies that we need to change to enable better incorporation of circular design thinking in development as well. So that sort of policy levers are some of the opportunities for us to influence that throughout the market. And the other part that I think someone was talking about, leveling the playing field between green building and all the stock standard buildings that we have, is that we also sort of are looking at, for example, our basics. I'm not sure if people know basics. It's our building sustainability index in New South Wales, and that's sort of a minimum targets for sustainability, if you want to think about that way, for all our new builds and also major upgrades as well. So within basics, there is actually the sort of move into looking at incorporating low emissions into part of the sustainability index. So that's like, a step forward to make sure that we, looking at sustainability more broadly than just the energy and the indoor comfort, and but also broadening it to material use as well. And I think there's also some work with our building commissioner looking at, how do we actually collect the data from our building sector on the material use and the embodied carbon as well. So I think there's lots of opportunities that we are trying to fit into, and and it's actually being done through all the various parts of government for the system as well. And it's it's a challenging space, but we got to start somewhere, and some of this would actually go down to we have to start collecting data to start with, for example, and then looking at where are the opportunities to actually look at the low-hanging fruit for certain areas, and then move on to the more challenging bits as we go.
Great. Now we've only got a couple of minutes. Did anyone want to comment on the tricky, hard question around degrowth? I've got another question that there's a lot of things coming up with on the chat window that we need to address as well. Would anyone like to have a go at degrowth, or do we insist that? Yeah, go Michael.
Look, rather than a challenge, I actually saw it as an opportunity, Ian, to actually discuss this for the first time, because it's really been interesting in the ACT how we've had this focus on sustainability and climate change, and yet we're rolling out PVs and batteries with absolutely no idea how we're going to manage them at end of life. Then we're building a whole bunch of apartments. We're sort of urban consolidation, and it's a great opportunity to actually talk about the various models that are part of circular economy, you know, service for product and things like that. So I think, so from our point of view, it's a narrative that we see an opportunity to bring into the policy discussion for the first time and explain that linkage. So it's not so much an answer, but it's about changing people's attitudes, because it does seem to be a bit of a, in Canberra, we're relatively high resource consumers, we're relatively affluent, and that reflects then through the high level of end-of-life waste. So not so much that I see a solution there, but it's at least an opportunity to actually talk about that in the context of being a genuinely sustainable city.
Great. Now, I've got at least 3 questions in the Q&A that are all talking about Australia-wide targets and the importance of Australian-wide leadership on this question. Now, it's really important to note that the panel here today, we brought together state governments. So that's why we've been focusing on state government level and how different governments need to work and experiment on this. There's no magic. We talk about reinventing the wheel, but actually we're all inventing different wheels. And, you know, the circular economy perfect wheel doesn't exist. There's no cut and paste that we can just put on it. I just want to flag, before I let everyone comment on that there's a New South Wales Circular National Task Force that we do have most, if not all, of the state governments present, plus the feds, plus potentially a couple of local governments. And we've had local government talking earlier today. So I wanted to reassure everyone online that local, state and federal governments are talking about this behind the scenes quite frequently. There are national targets around waste policy measures and packaging that have been really helpful. But no, we're not at the position yet in Australia that we have a very clear, well-articulated circular economy plan at a national level. I wanted to maybe flag to the panelists here today, how do they find that, is it necessarily a bad thing, or is it a good thing that we're able to experiment different things in different states and come together and learn from each other, and also learn from, you know, Michael was talking about learning from different cities and what they've done as well. So how do you feel in your jurisdiction about that ability to lead on some things, sit back and learn from others on others, and how much do you collaborate with your colleagues at federal and other state and potentially local government jurisdictions? Angela first.
Thanks, Jodie. And I agree with you. I think we're seeing lots of really useful, positive initiatives in all the states and territories around Australia, and there's lots of opportunities to learn from each other and copy and paste what works really, really well. I think the other thing about when we're looking at the difference between federal, state and local governments is that we all have different roles too, and constitutionally there are some things that the federal government is set up to do versus the state. So for example, if you're looking at interventions in the economy as a whole with businesses as corporations, that tends to be something that needs to be done at the federal level. States have to be really careful not to do anything that would affect trade between states, for example. So that really kind of clearly delineates different kinds of interventions that you might do at different levels of government. So, but Jodie's right. We are talking pretty regularly and learning from each other as we go.
Great. This will be the last comment, everyone, as well, because I've let us go a little bit over, I believe. So who wants to jump in next? Michael, and is there anything else you want to leave with us as well?
I agree with Angela. I think there's some great stuff, for example, that's happening in each jurisdiction. For example, we've been really inspired by the work that Victoria have done with its big build and recycle first policy, and I've been able to use that as an example of what's possible in the ACT to start addressing some of the barriers we've had here. On the other hand, I think once we move circular economy out as a waste concept, it ceases to be a state function and it starts to be more about the economy. And then it opens up a whole conversation about, you know, what's the best way of delivering this. And it was one thing that, and Angela will remember this, when we went to the Netherlands and we did that circular economy tour, one of the big, we tried to understand what made things work there that maybe didn't work in Australia. And one thing was that their ability historically and culturally to collaborate. And I still think there's a fair way to go, particularly politically. Often we're constrained around our ability to collaborate because of, I guess, the political relationships between the different layers of government. So I do believe there needs to be capacity for greater collaboration across all parts of society. And I think that's somewhere where Australia's still got a long, long way to go if we're actually going to achieve things at scale and make a genuine difference on these matters.
Having worked in France for 13 years, I absolutely agree with you, Michael. And it's really great to see that there's more platforms for collaborating happening now, but we're coming from a pretty low base, I think. Emily?
Yeah, I just want to just add on to, the others that while we have, the national sort of focus is a lot on the waste policy, and a lot of our discussions are actually beyond that. Like that forum actually created opportunities for all the other states and jurisdictions to actually talk to each other on other things that we do. So I think regardless of what the banner of that conversation is under, we all work in this space. And if we can continue to actually, strengthen that relationship and make sure that we actually have that conversation, learn lessons from each other. And also, with the key focus here is to ensure that we have consistency so that, the industry and the market can actually respond in a effective way. So I think we are all sort of focusing on the same objectives. It's, a bit of an effort for us to actually make that happen currently.
Ian?
Look, I think the model is working quite well at the moment. I think there's a good bit of rivalry and competition going with the states, which drives us forward, which really helps.
We mentioned CDL again, Ian.
44 years, I think, wasn't that?
44 years, is that right?
But I think that is a good. I think we learn a lot from each other all the time. Look at the single-use bans that are going all around the country. We're all listening to each other, working out what's going on. We have forums like this where we get together. I think the state role is really important because we are close to the people, and a lot of this is about behaviour change and about getting things through. So you can't do that at a national government. But then again, we as a state can't do things like putting bans on products coming into Australia. And Jody knows this very well because we're doing a materials flow analysis for South Australia, but it's just so hard because things come into the Port of Melbourne, say, and then they come across by road, and then we just lost that ability to actually look at material flows. So they're two good roles, and I think we're working quite well together. So thank you.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much to all the panelists. Lisa, I'm sorry we've gone a tad over time, but I think you'll agree it's been a great conversation, right?
Absolutely, Jody. Thank you, and thank you, panelists. A terrific summary of the national agenda, and we can see no one state can do this on its own. We need to continue to work together and learn from jurisdictions, their successes, even failures, as Ian and others have said, and how can we keep striving to design out waste across the entire economy, working with industry and researchers, of course. Well, what a day, what a way to finish day one of the Australian Circular Economy Forum 2022. I hope this forum has provided you with a lot to think about, projects to participate in, to replicate and scale, and trends to watch out for. I hope you also enjoyed and can leverage the research from our circular economy task forces showcased today in infrastructure and precincts, and also measuring carbon in the circular economy. This research, as we've mentioned, will be on our website along with our presentations and speakers and panelists from today. Don't forget to come back tomorrow, please. Our focus will be on finance and investment, and we've got another phenomenal lineup of speakers from Pollination, Clean Energy Finance Corp, Morrisons & Co, Commonwealth Bank. We'll also have international speakers, Intesa Sanpaolo on its world's biggest circular economy fund, and the Netherlands, the next gen water recycling disruption, Hydraloop. And I'm glad we've talked a little bit about water today. Something to watch out for tomorrow, which is World Water Day. We will have a message from the New South Wales Minister for Environment, the Honourable James Griffin, our new minister. And we'll also hear from Brambles and our own Taskforce chairs, Arup's Joyanne Manning, New South Wales Circular's Katie Dowling, and Australia's first Chief Circular Economist, our very own Dr. Kame Tang. So on behalf of the team at New South Wales Circular and our board, our funder, New South Wales Office of Chief Scientist and Engineer, an enormous thank you to each and every one of you for joining the forum today, Stay safe, stay circular, and see you tomorrow.